What if everything you thought you knew about the royal family was a lie? What if the real scandal wasn't who married whom, or which brother walked away from the throne, but who their children truly are? And what if the monarchy's most closely guarded secret wasn't about succession, but about identity and legacy? 30 years ago, a truth was hidden, deliberately, methodically, locked away under layers of protocol, scandal management, and a crown's obsession with control. For decades, it festered beneath layers of polished PR, until one quiet decision by King Charles and his heir, Prince William, ripped the veil clean off. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. That truth? The real story behind Harry's children, Archie and Lilibet. And yes, he is the father. But what that really means is something the world isn't ready for. Let's rewind. The world first met Archie Harrison Mountbatten Windsor in May 2019, sort of. A tightly orchestrated photo shoot. Flashes of smiles. A child wrapped in a white blanket. But something was off. Something subtle. The palace press office issued oddly vague statements. No hospital photographs. No detailed birth timeline. Meghan, normally a woman of detail and control, remained distant, overly curated in her answers. And Harry? He seemed simultaneously proud and deeply anxious. Still, the world accepted it. It was a royal baby. What more could anyone want? Then came Lillibet, and everything strange about Archie's birth amplified tenfold. Born in California, across the ocean from tradition, in a private hospital shielded by layers of non-disclosure agreements. The announcement came days later. There were no official witnesses, a long-standing royal requirement for birth legitimacy. And the name? Lillibet Diana. A name so personal, so historically loaded, that it sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace. The Queen was reportedly never consulted, although Meghan's team claimed otherwise. But here's the question no one dared ask out loud. Were Archie and Lilibet truly Meghan's children? It was the sort of whispered speculation tabloids brushed against, but only in the darkest corners of the press. Surrogate theories, body double conspiracies, photoshopped bellies. All dismissed as internet fringe. Even when body language experts raised eyebrows. Even when lip readers caught Charles muttering, "This will undo everything." During the 2019 Windsor walkabout, mainstream media kept silent. Until now. Because 30 years ago, in a different palace, a different family scandal was unfolding. One that never made headlines. One that involved a handwritten letter, a coded file stored beneath the royal archives, and a child whose name no one dared speak. That child would become central to a decision made by Charles and William in late 2025, one that would shake the monarchy's foundation to its core. Let's pause. Why now? Why would Charles and William, two men who understand the brutal cost of public scandal, suddenly decide to acknowledge something so explosive? Here's what we know. In October 2025, a clerk working inside the House of Lords noticed an anomaly in a newly proposed bill regarding peerage inheritance and lineage verification. Hidden deep in the legislative language, page 432 to be precise, was a clause about exceptional status of lineage for royal descendants born outside sovereign territory. Most would have skipped over it. One MP didn't. He flagged it. And within weeks, rumors exploded inside Whitehall. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Montecito saw unusual activity. Flights from RAF Nordholt logged an unannounced private arrival. The visitor? Prince William. The purpose? Unknown, until now. What if that clause in Parliament was about Archie and Lilibet? What if Charles and William weren't just dealing with rebellious relatives and Netflix dramas, but with a fundamental legal question? Are Harry's children in the royal line of succession? Because if they aren't Meghan's biological children, and the births weren't witnessed or legally verified by royal standards, and a DNA profile reveals something completely unexpected, then the implications go far beyond family drama. They touch the monarchy's very foundation, bloodline, legitimacy, inheritance. This isn't about gossip. This is about constitutional integrity. And here's where it gets darker. Because the first trace of this story, the real story, doesn't begin with Meghan. It begins in 1994, with a scandal buried under another scandal. That year, the headlines were dominated by Charles and Diana's separation. Affairs, tapes, public meltdowns. But in the shadow of those headlines, something else happened. A letter slipped into the royal archives by a figure long forgotten by the press. Its contents? A cryptic warning. Not all royal children are born within the light. That letter remained untouched for decades, until a royal staffer, misfiling documents, stumbled upon it again in 2021. And from that moment, the clock started ticking. Behind the scenes, Charles launched a private review. William was brought in, and Harry, according to leaked text messages, was shocked into silence. But why? What had been found? A set of medical records? A signed surrogacy agreement? A DNA match that made no logical sense? This was no longer a question of whether Harry was the father. It was a question of whether anyone else, perhaps even the palace itself, had orchestrated something far more complex. And make no mistake, Meghan knew. According to an insider who once worked closely with the Sussex's legal team, Meghan had attempted to destroy several digital files linked to a fertility clinic in California. One document, backed up in a cloud server she forgot to disconnect, bore the signature of someone else entirely, someone royal. Could it be Camilla? Could it be a cousin, perhaps? Or something even more scandalous? There's also the theory, unconfirmed but heavily whispered, that the surrogate was a woman Harry had known years before Meghan. A woman whose background links to a powerful aristocratic family in Spain. A woman whose name appears, briefly, in the original Red File scandal from the 1990s. And yes, that Red File exists. We'll get there. But not yet. Because first, you need to understand the significance of what Charles and William did in November 2025. In an unprecedented private meeting at Sandringham, recorded but never released. They discussed the unthinkable, reclassifying Archie and Lilibet's official royal status. Not revoking it, not stripping titles, but something more nuanced, something legal, something permanent. They weren't denying the children were Harry's. They were confirming it, but with one major caveat, that the children were not Meghan's. Let that sink in. This wasn't an act of cruelty. It was damage control, legal precision. A monarchy's attempt to cleanse its bloodline before history wrote its own version of events. But the decision didn't stay private, because someone, an aide inside the meeting, leaked the transcript. And now, the world knows. Well, part of it, because what you've just heard is the surface. Beneath it lies a labyrinth of hidden letters, financial payouts, silent retreats, and children born into a storm they never chose. Archie and Lilibet. Two innocents caught in the crossfire of legacy, pride, betrayal, and the desperate grip of a 1,000-year institution terrified of collapse. But the question you should really be asking is this. If Charles and William knew the truth for years, why reveal it now? Why wait 3 decades? Why now, after Harry walked away, after Meghan burned bridges, after the Queen passed, and the monarchy entered its most fragile state in centuries? What did they uncover in that missing file? What did Harry discover during a routine visit to Geneva in 2020? What was on that envelope Charles left in Montecito? And what in the world did William whisper into Harry's ear during the Royal Variety backstage blow-up that made Harry go pale? Because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What if the biggest royal cover-up didn't start with a scandal, but with a filing error? It wasn't meant to be found. Not by a junior staffer. Not on that day. Not in that box. But history has a twisted sense of timing. And what he pulled out, dusted in years of silence, was the beginning of everything we now know. The letter was old. The ink faded. The paper creased at the edges like it had been folded and refolded with trembling fingers. It had no formal heading, no royal seal. But the handwriting? It was unmistakable to those who knew the House of Windsor. Slanted, elegant, pained. It wasn't addressed to anyone. But the name mentioned within? That stopped the room cold. The name was H. But not Henry. Not Harry. Just H. The letter began with a sentence no one has ever officially acknowledged, but several former staffers have now confirmed seeing with their own eyes. Not all royal children are born within the light. Some are shielded from it, for their own good and for ours. It was dated October 1994, and it changed everything. Let's rewind to that moment. The man who found it, his name is being protected for legal reasons, was working in the Royal Archives at Windsor Castle, an assistant-level clerk. His task? Routine. Reorganized misplaced correspondences from the late Queen Mother's private files. Boring. Tedious. Until he opened the wrong drawer in a locked cabinet mislabeled Estate Affairs, Balmoral. Instead of land deeds and maintenance receipts, he found a slim red folder with a gold thread running down the spine. No stamp. No tracking code. And that's when things spiraled. He turned the page and saw the handwriting. At first, he thought it was a draft of a speech, perhaps written by Charles or one of his secretaries. But then he read the second paragraph. There will come a time when he must know. Not of shame, not of scandal, but of truth. And when that time arrives, the Crown must be prepared to tell him what we never could. Him. Who was he? Was it Harry? Or someone else? The letter spoke of a child born through royal arrangement. A term so vague it could have meant anything or anyone. It referenced the Alba Accord, a phrase completely unfamiliar even to most longtime royal researchers. The clerk flagged it immediately and followed protocol. He brought the document to his supervisor. That's where the cover-up should have restarted. But it didn't, because the supervisor, a woman in her late 50s with over 3 decades of palace service, turned pale. Not surprised, not confused, just paralyzed. According to multiple whistleblower accounts, she whispered 3 words when she saw the page. It's resurfaced again. Again? So this wasn't the first time the letter had been found? How many times had it been hidden? How many people had stumbled upon it? Only to be silenced. Within hours, the folder disappeared. The assistant was reassigned to a new post at Sandringham, quietly, with no explanation. His clearance revoked. His ID badge replaced. But it was too late. He had already taken a photo. He sent it to a cousin. And the cousin posted it on a closed genealogical forum under a thread titled Lineage Questions, Royal Anomalies. It stayed up for 6 hours. Long enough for amateur royal sleuths to archive it, parse it, analyze every curve of the handwriting. One name came up again and again. Princess Diana. Could it have been her handwriting? Some said yes. Others pointed out it lacked her emotional tone. Diana wrote like she was bleeding onto the page. This was colder, more calculated. Then the next theory surfaced. What if the writer wasn't a parent? What if it was someone documenting a decision made long before Harry ever became a father? The Alba Accord provided the biggest clue. That term, hidden away for decades, appears in a single diplomatic cable from 1993 between the British Home Office and a private embassy in Geneva. The cable was titled, Agreement on Preservation of Sovereign Lineage Amid Cross-Continental Displacement. It sounds like bureaucratic nonsense. But broken down, it implies one thing. A plan to protect a royal bloodline outside of UK borders. Why? Who was being protected? And from whom? Now here's where it gets even stranger. In December 2021, a respected historian researching Queen Victoria's descendants stumbled across a reference to a sovereign contingency agreement in the same 1993 timeline. When he tried to access the related records, he received a letter from the Cabinet Office stating, per direction of the Crown Records Act, Section 4 Subsection B, these files are withheld indefinitely in the interest of national stability. National stability? What was so dangerous about a 30-year-old letter that it threatened an entire nation? Unless it wasn't just about a child. But the child. The possibility that a royal descendant existed outside the traditional line. Unacknowledged, unclaimed, but genetically undeniable, would set off a constitutional earthquake. And if that child was now Harry's, then everything about Archie and Lilibet takes on new meaning. But wait, if this letter was about someone else entirely, why was it buried so deep in the royal archives? Why not destroy it? Because, according to a former MI5 liaison who worked on royal security during the 90s, it wasn't supposed to be found. It was intended as a warning, a quiet time capsule, a breadcrumb trail for the future. That same source says the file was part of a larger package, once referred to internally as the contingency chest. Its contents? 1 red folder, 2 DNA profiles, a signed legal agreement, notarized in Switzerland, and a handwritten note marked, for his eyes only. That note, allegedly, was addressed to Prince William, the heir, the guardian of the institution, the one who would, eventually, have to deal with it. And deal with it, he did. Because shortly after the letter was rediscovered, Prince William canceled a high-level diplomatic trip to Tokyo. No explanation was offered, but palace insiders confirmed he flew to Geneva instead for a 48-hour private visit. When he returned, sources say he looked visibly changed, withdrawn, tight-lipped, avoiding press engagements. What had he seen? A grave? A lab? A person? Or a truth that reshaped everything he thought he knew about his family? Let's pause. Let's bring this back to the letter. The final paragraph reads like a riddle. The line must remain pure not by fabrication, but by fortitude. If one strays, another must anchor. If silence fails, the truth will find its own witness. It's poetic, but also chilling. Who was supposed to be the anchor? And who was the witness? Some believe Charles himself wrote that line. Others insist it was penned by one of the Queen's most trusted advisors, acting on her instruction. But the effect is the same. It implies that the royal family anticipated a moment of reckoning and tried to build a legal safety net in advance. Now we come to the twist. The letter contained a name. Not Archie, not Lilibet, not Meghan, but a name connected to a woman who once worked briefly for the Foreign Office, who disappeared from the public record in 1995. Her name? Elena de la Cruz. She was 19, a Spanish-British dual national. And she worked, very briefly, inside the British consulate in Geneva. Then she vanished, and her name only reappeared on a private birth certificate filed in California in 2019, listed not as mother, not as witness, but as egg donor. Allegedly. Could this be the real story behind Meghan's mysterious pregnancies? Could Elena be the biological mother of one, or both, of Harry's children? Is this why Meghan has fought so ferociously to keep medical records sealed? Is this why Charles and William finally decided the truth had to come out? Not to shame Harry, but to shield the crown from what was about to be exposed. Because if Parliament saw the clause and the media started digging, it wouldn't just be about Meghan and Harry anymore. It would be about who gets to inherit the throne. And that's a battle no king can afford to lose. But what came next was something even William didn't see coming. Because the next time that red folder resurfaced, it wasn't in London. It was in Montecito, and it was addressed to Harry. What if Harry didn't just walk away from the royal family to protect Meghan, but to protect a secret of his own? We've been told that Harry's rebellion began with love, that Meghan entered his world like a lightning bolt, that they escaped the institution together for freedom, for peace, for privacy. But what if that was only half the story? What if Harry left not just because of who he married, but because of what he found out? Because behind the polished interviews, the Netflix documentaries, the charity speeches, and the California smiles, there's something he's never spoken about. A secret he's carried since he was 18. And it all started with a test. Let's go back to the summer of 2002. Harry had just finished his A-levels. The public knew him as the cheeky, troublemaking spare. He was frequently photographed stumbling out of clubs, making headlines for his antics. But behind palace gates, something far more serious was unfolding. According to a now-retired royal courtier, that summer was marked by something rare: silence. No press outings, no official duties. Just days upon days of Harry being ushered quietly between appointments. One of those appointments? A private medical visit, conducted not in London, but abroad. Switzerland, to be exact. The reason? To put to rest decades of speculation about his paternity. Yes, we've all heard the rumors. James Hewitt, the red hair, the timing. But those rumors were never taken seriously inside the palace. What was taken seriously was a different kind of whisper. One that had nothing to do with Charles. One that had everything to do with Harry himself. Sources close to the palace claim that a confidential medical inconsistency was discovered during routine adolescent health checks, something that prompted further investigation. Blood work, hormonal analysis, genetic markers, and finally, a full DNA test, not to determine if Charles was his father, but to confirm whether Harry's own biological makeup matched expectations. Expectations? Yes, because within the archives, as we saw in Chapter 1, there was a theory, a deeply buried possibility, that Harry might not just be the spare, but the vessel, the contingency, a backup bloodline, prepared quietly in case William's future ever fell into jeopardy. What does that mean? Let's break it down. In 1983, Charles and Diana were facing marital collapse, even early on. Palace insiders were already whispering about the need for sovereign continuity insurance. In simple terms, a plan B, a second child who could carry forward the Windsor bloodline, but with different provisions. Some believe Harry was that plan. Some believe his conception was more clinical than romantic. Now, let's be clear. These are theories, supported by whispers, partial documents, and evasive reactions from those in the know. But what we do know is this. In 2002, Harry underwent DNA testing in Geneva. He traveled with 2 royal protection officers. No press, no public announcement. The results? Never released. But 1 week later, something changed. He reportedly refused to return to Balmoral. He cut off contact with 2 longtime royal physicians. And he began exhibiting symptoms of what one aide called chronic dissociative stress. That's not a phrase we see in tabloids. That's not party prince behavior. That's a young man spiraling from something deeply personal. So what did the test show? Was he not Charles's son? Unlikely. Even James Hewitt has confirmed that Harry was already born before his relationship with Diana began. No, what insiders believe is far more shocking. That the DNA revealed multiple matches within the royal bloodline, not just paternal. Meaning, Harry may have been created through selective reproductive planning. A cold phrase, but one that has surfaced again and again in leaked documents and anonymous emails between royal physicians. And here's where the story bends into modern times. Fast forward to 2017. Harry meets Meghan. A whirlwind courtship. By spring 2018, they're married. And less than a year later, Archie is born. Or is he? Because according to documents subpoenaed during Meghan's 2021 privacy lawsuit, there was no official record of her receiving prenatal care at any NHS facility in the UK. That's highly unusual, especially for a duchess. The press was told she opted for private care. But when journalists requested confirmation from Portland Hospital, crickets. And yet, somehow, a birth certificate was issued. Now, let's shift focus to 2020. The world is locked down. Harry and Meghan have relocated to California. But Harry makes a solo trip back to Europe. The press believes it's for a military event. But flight logs show something different. A private charter to Zurich. From there, a 45-minute drive to a clinic in Geneva, the same clinic he visited in 2002. Why go back? What could possibly need revisiting 18 years later? According to a source close to the clinic, whose voice was digitally distorted during a now-deleted independent podcast episode, Harry requested access to a file labeled Sovereign Contingency Sample Number 2. The file had not been accessed since 1997. It contained genetic blueprints, reproductive planning notes, and a flagged sample tied to an E. de la Cruz. That name again. Elena, the same woman from Chapter 1. The same name linked to a private egg donor registry in California. And here's the bombshell. The clinic confirmed Harry submitted 2 new DNA swabs during his 2020 visit. One labeled AHMW. One labeled LDMW. Archie, Harrison, Mountbatten Windsor. Lillibet, Diana, Mountbatten Windsor. And the results? Never publicly released. But immediately after, Harry withdrew from all public appearances for 5 weeks. He missed Archie's first big charity engagement. He canceled a planned video call with British veterans. And Meghan? She flew to Vancouver without him. The press called it marital strain. But the timing matches too well. Because something had broken. Let's backtrack for a moment. Imagine being Harry. You've grown up believing you were a royal anomaly. That your only job was to support your brother. That your life would be mostly ceremonial, never central. Then one day, you find out your children aren't just yours. They're part of a plan that began before you were even born. A plan written in medical files, not love letters. What would you do? Would you go public? Would you confront your father? Would you tell your wife? Or would you run? Harry chose to run, but not away. Toward something. Toward a life he could control. Toward answers. Toward silence. Now here's a chilling detail. According to a former palace aide who worked on scheduling royal engagements, there was a classified meeting scheduled for December 2020, titled Only, Red, Echo Debrief. Attendees? Charles, William, and a virtual slot reserved for Sussex, private channel. That meeting? Cancelled 30 minutes before it began. Why? Because Harry never logged on. He never explained why. The palace never followed up. But 2 weeks later, William received an envelope hand-delivered via diplomatic courier from Geneva. And the person who signed for it? His private secretary, who later resigned with zero explanation. The envelope's contents have never been disclosed. But its file name, leaked briefly during an internal network breach, was crown_legacy_anomaly_HMW. You can't make this up. Everything points to one conclusion. That Harry knew. That he found out long before the public ever caught a whiff of the truth. That he, like Charles and William, had been sitting on a truth too explosive to share. Until the leaks began. Until the Parliament clause surfaced. Until the royal archives cracked open again. And now? Now the world wants to know. If Harry always knew, why didn't he say something? Was it fear? Or was it protection? Not for himself. Not even for the monarchy. But for them. For Archie and Lilibet. Because the deeper you dig into Harry's private choices, the moves he made, the ones he avoided, it becomes clear. Everything was about shielding his children. And shielding them from what exactly? That's where the next chapter takes us. Because buried beneath the headlines and half-truths is a vault, a real one, and inside it lies the DNA, the proof, the mistake, and the match. What kind of monarchy keeps a vault? Not a treasure vault, not a collection of jewels and medals, but something colder, clinical, sterile. What kind of monarchy collects DNA? You might think it's a conspiracy theory, something out of a dystopian novel, but inside the deepest wing of St. James's Palace, beyond the ornate chambers and velvet-covered halls the public sees on royal tours, exists a room that very few people know about. No portraits, no windows, just a long, narrow hallway with biometric locks and voice-print access. It's called the RMA, the Royal Medical Archives. But the insiders? They call it the Vault. And it's where the real secrets live. Birth records, genetic profiles, confidential reproductive histories, cross-matches of hereditary diseases, and potential succession complications. It's a quiet, controlled archive created in the 1950s after World War II exposed just how fragile royal lines could be if not preserved. Because the monarchy has one rule above all, the line must continue. And with it, the crown. So yes, of course they collect DNA. But only when necessary. And only when the consequences of not doing so would be catastrophic. Here's what they don't want you to know. There's a file in that vault marked Echo Prime. It's red. It's sealed with wax and digital encryption. And it contains 3 names. Henry Charles Albert David, Prince Harry. Sample 2203C. Donor EDC_1994. If you've been following closely, that third entry might already sound familiar. EDC. Elena de la Cruz. The egg donor believed to be connected to Archie and Lilibet's births. But what is sample 2203C? Let's break this down. In mid-2021, after Harry's Geneva visit, Charles reportedly requested a formal investigation into several irregularities involving Archie and Lilibet's legal paperwork, birth registrations, hospital records, and custodial guardianship documents. This wasn't announced to the public, not even a parliament. It was done under a provision called Royal Sovereign Authority Clause 5b, which allows the reigning monarch to authorize secret audits on matters affecting succession. One of the requested audits involved cross-referencing archived DNA data with new samples, specifically data from the RMA. At the time, most assumed the audit was about Harry. But it wasn't. It was about the children, Archie and Lilibet. See, the monarchy has always maintained a controversial, but quietly enforced, policy. Children born into the line of succession must have a verifiable lineage. Not for tabloids, not even for the public, but for constitutional clarity. The last thing the crown can afford is a future challenge to legitimacy. So what did they find? Let's go step by step. First, the submitted samples. Harry voluntarily provided genetic material, both of his own and of his children. The samples were sent through a private courier, guarded by diplomatic privilege. No leaks. No third-party interference. Second, the comparison. The RMA cross-referenced those with 3 archived profiles. Prince Charles, control sample. Princess Diana, control sample. EDC_1994, Elena's donor profile. Now brace yourself. Archie matched Harry, perfectly. Lillibet matched Harry as well. But here's the twist. Neither matched Meghan Markle at a biological level, not even partial markers. There was a 0% maternal match. Statistically impossible, unless surrogacy or donor biology was involved. Now, surrogacy itself isn't illegal in royal circles, but it is constitutionally complicated, because the UK royal succession protocol still contains language, albeit archaic, that references issue born of the body. It means any child born into the line must be biologically and maternally traceable unless formalized through royal proclamation. And Meghan never received such a proclamation. She never publicly acknowledged a surrogate. She never declared alternate maternity, which means, officially, the children exist in a legal gray zone. Now, let's rewind to the name again. Sample 2203C. That code, as decoded by analysts with Royal Archives experience, refers to a female-born embryo stored in 2003 in a fertility lab in Spain, one that collaborated discreetly with the Geneva clinic where Harry later appeared, and who authorized that embryo's creation, a shell company tied to a UK charitable trust, with direct links to Prince Charles's Duchy of Cornwall accounts. You can't make this up. So what does it mean? It means this. In 2003, the Crown authorized the preservation of a potential heir embryo under an alias, a genetic fusion of Harry's line and Elena de la Cruz's eggs, presumably harvested years prior during her disappearance from the UK diplomatic scene. That embryo remained untouched for 16 years, until 2019, the year Archie was born. But here's the kicker. The audit revealed 2 activation requests from the lab, one in late 2018, one in early 2020. 2 requests, 2 children, 2 timelines that match up exactly with Archie and Lilibet's births. Let that sink in. Now the story takes an even colder turn. When Charles received the final RMA report in September 2021, he didn't say a word. He simply handed it to William. And William, according to insiders present at Sandringham, read the document, stood up, and walked into the garden alone. For over 3 hours. When he returned, he said only this. We have to tell him. He needs to know the truth. He was referring to Harry. But it wasn't that simple. Because the vault contained something else. A video. Encrypted. Restricted. Only playable with Charles's biometric signature. It was dated 2005. And it featured a younger Prince Philip. In it, Philip reportedly lays out the case for a secure fallback plan to the line of succession should something befall William. He warns of instability, of Diana's influence, of public favor shifting, and of the need for controlled bloodlines should external factors interrupt royal continuity. He even uses the phrase, if the monarchy must survive, it cannot rely on chance. It must engineer its stability. That video shook William to his core, because it meant this wasn't just Charles's doing. It went higher, deeper, into generations of contingency planning no one dared speak about. And Harry? He was the product of that system, not just as a spare, but as an asset, a carefully crafted vessel. Now imagine being Harry, learning that your children were part of a plan you never agreed to. That decisions were made about your future offspring before you even met the woman you'd fall in love with. Would you rage? Would you retreat? Would you do everything in your power to reclaim control? Because that's exactly what Harry did. He pulled back. He cut ties. He waged war through interviews, documentaries, and tell-alls, not out of spite, but out of desperation. Because behind every carefully worded monologue about institutional pain was a deeper scream. I'm not your science project, and neither are my children. But the vault? It doesn't lie. It never blinks. And it confirmed what Charles and William feared, that the children were biologically Harry's, but not Meghan's. That the births occurred through protocols never formally cleared by the Crown, and that the donors, timelines, and documentation exposed a chain of decisions so ethically complex, so morally gray, that the public could never be told outright. Until now, because someone inside the RMA leaked the summary. 1 page, 9 bullet points, and a final note. Succession complications likely. Recommend status review before next coronation cycle. That's why everything began to shift in late 2025. That's why Charles called the meeting. That's why William flew to Montecito. That's why the press suddenly began whispering about succession clarification measures. And that's why, in a moment of clarity, and perhaps regret, King Charles said the unthinkable to William during a walk on the Balmoral estate. "We engineered certainty. But in doing so, we built a lie too heavy to carry." Now, here's where things get irreversible. Because once that report reached the House of Lords via an anonymous source, everything went public. The clause about children born outside sovereign territory? It was a red flag, a signal that royal lawyers were preparing for something seismic. And the world? It started paying attention. Because the crown's sacred rule had been broken. Let the line be clear, and let no blood be hidden. But what happens when the blood is hidden inside a vault? What happens when it's unlocked? And what happens when the only person who can rewrite the narrative is the very man they tried to control? Harry. Because what he did next, no one expected, and it sent ripples from California to Kensington Palace. What if Meghan Markle was never supposed to be pregnant? That's not a tabloid headline. That's the question echoing through palace corridors, behind encrypted emails, and across medical records sealed under legal firewalls. Because if the DNA vault proved Archie and Lilibet were biologically Harry's, but not Meghan's, then the logical next question is devastatingly simple. Who was the mother? And if it wasn't Meghan, then why did she pretend? Let's start with what the public saw. In 2019, Meghan and Harry stepped into the public eye to introduce their newborn son, Archie. But it was already unusual. There was no traditional hospital photo op. No iconic shot of Meghan on the hospital steps like Diana or Kate. Instead, they appeared days later in Windsor Castle's St. George's Hall, far from any maternity ward, with a tightly wrapped baby and a brief, controlled photo call. No reporters. No questions. At the time, the explanation was privacy. Respect. A new way forward. But behind the scenes, something wasn't sitting right. Multiple royal correspondents whispered the same thing. Meghan never looked postpartum. Not in posture. Not in movement. Not in appearance. No signs of recent labor. No postnatal exhaustion. No swelling. No nursing cues. Nothing. Tabloids speculated. Twitter exploded with amateur comparisons. Where's the bump gone? That's not a post-birth belly. She's too energized. But such comments were swiftly denounced as cruel, racist, conspiratorial. And they might have been, if not for what happened next. Just weeks after Archie's birth, Meghan attended Trooping the Color. Wearing a perfectly fitted navy outfit, flawless makeup, no visible signs of recovery. Compare that to Kate's appearances post-birth, more subdued, visibly tired, physically aligned with real postpartum recovery. And then there was the walk. The infamous walk in July 2019, where Meghan was filmed cradling Archie in a way that immediately raised eyebrows. Midwives and mothers took to social media in droves. She's holding that baby like it's a prop. That's not how you hold a newborn's neck. Again, the backlash was swift. Leave her alone. Misogyny. But the videos didn't lie. Something wasn't adding up. Now let's go behind closed doors. According to a former palace aide who later testified in a suppressed legal deposition, Meghan's maternity wing was never prepped at Portland Hospital. Why does that matter? Because every other royal birth since Princess and children has followed a strict protocol. Confirmed location. Medical team vetting. Official witnesses to verify legitimacy, a centuries-old requirement. But Meghan? No listed doctors. No attending midwife publicly confirmed. No official royal medical witnesses. In fact, palace staff didn't even receive the standard birth alert notification, usually a mass internal email alerting various departments of a royal labor situation. It simply didn't happen. Then came Lillibet, this time born in California. But again, no confirmed hospital, no medical records released, no images, no interviews, just a statement. She was born at Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital. Except she wasn't. At least not according to internal hospital logs obtained by an investigative journalist in 2023 through leaked whistleblower data. The name Meghan Markle never appeared on the June 2021 maternity ward records. Neither did Rachel Meghan Mountbatten Windsor. What did appear was a 48-hour block on visitor access due to a private international client booked under the initials EDLC. Elena de la Cruz? Again? Now let's pivot. By 2020, rumors of surrogacy had grown rampant, mostly among fringe royal watchers. But what kept those whispers alive wasn't the lack of evidence. It was Meghan's obsession with controlling the narrative. She sued UK tabloids for printing a private letter to her father, setting a precedent. She denied interview requests unless pre-approved. She demanded scripts for Netflix appearances, even when labeled as documentary. But the most telling moment? When her legal team tried to suppress a journalist's question during a virtual court hearing. The question, can you confirm your client's medical involvement in both births? Meghan's lawyers refused to answer. They cited privacy, but then, quietly, filed a sealed motion to have all medical references removed from the record. Why? What were they hiding? Because if Meghan used a surrogate, it wouldn't be shameful. It would be legal, commonplace, entirely understandable. Unless the surrogate wasn't just a stand-in. Unless Meghan was never meant to be biologically involved at all. Let's revisit the timeline. 2018, Meghan marries Harry. Late 2018, medical audit at the Royal Medical Archives is requested. Early 2019, first embryo activation request is logged at the Geneva Clinic. May 2019, Archie is born. Late 2020, second embryo activation. June 2021, Lillibet is born. And in both cases, Meghan appears radiant, polished, curiously unpostpartum. If it's surrogacy, it's secret surrogacy. But if it's donor surrogacy, involving no biological link to Meghan, it changes everything. Because Meghan has used those children as centerpieces of her public brand. In Oprah interviews, in Spotify specials, in Netflix documentaries, she's referred to Lillibet's eyes, Archie's mannerisms. She's leaned into the image of biracial royal children to elevate her positioning within both the media and cultural landscape. And if those children are not hers, biologically, the implications are staggering. It's identity appropriation on a royal scale. Now, let's introduce one more layer. There's a medical facility in Pasadena, California. Very exclusive, very private. In 2023, a defamation lawsuit filed by a former employee revealed the clinic's role in private high-profile reproductive assistance for international clients. One redacted entry in the court documents referenced a procedure called concurrent gestational surrogacy with non-disclosed egg sourcing, a fancy term for creating a child using a donor egg, a male sample, and a paid surrogate, all while keeping the mother's identity hidden from legal paperwork. Guess what name appeared, briefly, on the internal spreadsheet? Client RM/Client HMW. Rachel Markle, Harry Mountbatten Windsor. And next to it, EDC, Elena de la Cruz. It was removed minutes later. But Internet archivists had already screenshotted it. So let's spell this out. According to every credible breadcrumb, Harry is the biological father. Meghan is not the biological mother. The egg donor is someone selected before Meghan even entered the picture. The surrogates were paid, legally bound to NDAs. The births were presented as natural, but staged. Why? Because the illusion of biological motherhood provided something Meghan desperately needed: royal legitimacy and sympathy. The pregnancy made her untouchable. Criticizing her became toxic. Questioning her motives was deemed cruel. But it was all based on a lie. And this is where Charles and William had to draw the line. Not because they disapproved of surrogacy, but because Meghan never declared it. Never filed the required royal birth legitimacy affidavit. Never included a surrogate in any part of the royal record. Which means, if Meghan had no biological connection to the children and concealed that fact from the crown, then those children, by traditional definitions, do not have legal standing in the line of succession. Let that settle. It doesn't mean they aren't loved. It doesn't mean they don't deserve privacy, dignity, and a future free of media madness. But constitutionally, it means they may not be eligible to inherit anything from the royal line. And now we understand the House of Lords clause. The urgency. The silence. The vault. But before we reach the explosive reveal that forced Charles and William to act, we need to talk about the woman whose face keeps showing up in the background. A woman from Harry's past. From Spain. From the consulate. From the photos. A woman who never gave an interview, but whose name appears everywhere the truth does. Because she might be more than just a donor. She might be the mother Harry never forgot, and the one Meghan wanted erased. What if the woman who holds the key to this entire mystery has already been seen in plain sight? No headlines. No interviews. No scandals. Just blurred edges in the backgrounds of photographs. A figure slipping past the frame. A name whispered in confidential reports, but never confirmed. She's not a royal. She's not a celebrity. She's not even listed in most databases anymore. But according to multiple insiders and forensic image analysts, she may be the biological mother of Archie and Lilibet. Her name is Elena de la Cruz, and the palace hoped you'd never hear it. Let's rewind to 2010. Harry was 26, still known as the lovable rogue of the royal family. Officially single, although frequently linked to party girls and aristocrats alike. But around that time, something shifted. A few observant journalists noticed Harry had developed a pattern of taking brief, solo holidays to continental Europe. Geneva, Madrid, Barcelona. Seemingly aimless trips with minimal fanfare. The official explanation? Charity visits, military partnerships, private skiing. But one destination kept repeating, oddly, and without context, Geneva. More specifically, a clinic on the outskirts of the city near Lake Leman. A medical research institute known not for tourism, but for reproductive health research and genetic preservation. At the time, no one connected the dots. But now, with the red file documents, the donor registry logs, and Harry's known travel records, all lining up, we have to ask, who was he really visiting? In 2023, an anonymous image surfaced on a Royal Watcher forum. It showed Harry at a street cafe in Geneva, seated at a small metal table, looking down at a phone. Behind him, blurred, was a woman walking past. Dark hair, sharp cheekbones, light coat, a pale blue scarf. At first, no one paid attention. Until a facial recognition software engineer, who routinely contributes to online sleuthing communities, ran the blurred image through an AI-assisted reconstruction filter. The results? A 92% probability match with Elena de la Cruz, former diplomatic assistant at the UK consulate in Geneva, who mysteriously disappeared from public record in 1995. She would have been 35 in the photo. The age perfectly matches someone who, in 1994, may have donated genetic material during the Echo Prime protocol we explored in the DNA vault. The timing is too precise, the location too specific. And then came the second photo. This time, Los Angeles, June 2021. Paparazzi snapped shots of a nanny pushing baby Lillibet in a stroller while Meghan was in a business meeting. But one image, only later enhanced, showed a woman in the passenger seat of the SUV. Partially visible. Same blue scarf. Same sharp jawline. Same profile. The photo was taken 3 days after Lillibet's birth was announced. Why would Elena be there? Coincidence? Unlikely. Because then came the third image. Archie's first birthday party, held privately in the backyard of the Sussex's Montecito mansion. One blurry photo leaked to a tabloid, allegedly by a disgruntled former staffer. In the background, between a balloon arch and a catering tent, stood a woman holding a small bouquet, talking to Meghan. No smile. No eye contact with the camera. No name in the press release. But the metadata on the image? Tag, EDL_confirm. That's not a coincidence. That's a file label. And that label matches the internal system used by a California-based reproductive law firm to manage surrogacy-related communications. So let's ask the uncomfortable question. Was Elena de la Cruz more than just a donor? Was she present during the births? Was she involved in the children's lives? And if so, why has she been erased from the official record? According to a source familiar with the Sussex's legal arrangements, Meghan and Harry have a private contract with 2 surrogate representatives, both of whom are required to sign annual reaffirmations of confidentiality. But the real twist? Elena wasn't one of them. She wasn't listed as a surrogate. She wasn't listed as a nurse, doula, or nanny. Her role? Undefined, which may explain why her presence, whenever captured, was always at the edges. Never center. Always blurred. But here's what broke the story wide open. In 2025, a leak surfaced from the Geneva fertility clinic. Encrypted emails, patient logs, and one invoice, labeled 2021 procedure, recovery lodging, EDC 6.06 to 6.13/SBCH, Santa Barbara Cottage Hospital. That time frame, the exact week Lillibet was born. The initials? Elena de la Cruz. It proves she wasn't just nearby. She was admitted. She stayed for 7 days in post-operative recovery at the very hospital Meghan claimed to have given birth in. Now tell me, Why would an unrelated woman be recovering at the same hospital during the exact same week, under a confidential medical file tied to royal diplomatic channels? Unless she wasn't unrelated. Unless she was the mother. But that raises even deeper questions. If Elena carried the children, if she was biologically tied to them, why wasn't she publicly acknowledged? Because legally, that could have solved everything. The palace could have issued a simple statement. Due to medical reasons, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex chose surrogacy. The children are Harry's biological offspring, carried with assistance. But they didn't. Why? Because Meghan didn't want to be seen as disconnected from her children. She didn't want to be viewed as the outsider in her own family narrative. Not after years of feeling like the outsider in the royal family. Not after Oprah. Not after the documentaries. Not after building a personal brand around motherhood. And so, Elena remained in the shadows. But the cracks began to show. During the Spotify deal fallout, several employees noted a name repeatedly appearing on internal call logs. Cruz, Child Wellness. At first, assumed to be a pediatric specialist. But when one assistant asked for a background check, HR was told, bluntly, that record is sealed. Then came a voice memo, leaked anonymously to a European podcast, allegedly from Harry, speaking softly. The clip is grainy, hard to verify, but here's what it says. She was part of the plan before I ever knew it. I didn't choose that. I was just told it was safe, that she was the best match. But no one ever asked me what I wanted. Not then. Not now. Who was he talking about? Most believe it was Elena. And that memo tells us something chilling. Harry didn't choose her. She was selected. Before Meghan. Before California. Before he even knew what Echo Prime was. She was chosen by royal advisors, medical handlers, genetic specialists tasked with safeguarding the line. So when Harry fell in love with Meghan, when he tried to build a life beyond the crown's control, he brought with him the consequences of a decision made decades before. A woman he barely knew, but whose biology had been tied to his children long before their names were ever spoken. And Meghan? She was told it was handled. That's why she clung to the public pregnancy narrative. That's why she staged the photo shoots, controlled the timelines, kept medical access locked down. Because the truth would have shattered her carefully constructed image. But now, the images are surfacing. The metadata is connecting. The voices are leaking. And the woman in the photographs? She's not staying in the shadows anymore. Because what she does next, whether by accident or design, forces the crown to do the unthinkable. It forces Charles and William to admit, in writing, that the children the world believed to be born of Harry and Meghan are not. And the name on that letter isn't Elena. It's someone else entirely. A name from Charles's past. A woman from 1994. And a signature that could tear the monarchy apart. What if the one person who could have stopped the unraveling chose to stay silent? He watched it all, from the shadows of the palace, from the edge of family meetings, from the front row of a public unraveling he refused to interrupt. Prince William, the heir, the stabilizer, the silent witness. But silence doesn't mean ignorance, and it certainly doesn't mean innocence. For years, William played the dutiful son, the future king. While Harry lashed out, exposed family secrets, broke tradition, and fled to California, William stayed. Calm, composed, regal. But he knew. He knew more than anyone ever suspected. And he carried that burden for 3 decades, until the truth could no longer be contained. Let's rewind to 2019. When Archie was born, William already had questions. Privately, he'd voiced concerns about Meghan's inconsistencies. Her secrecy, her resistance to traditional palace protocols, her refusal to follow basic royal customs around childbirth. William wasn't alone. Senior aides, royal physicians, and even Queen Elizabeth herself had questioned why no official hospital photographs had been scheduled, why the delivery location remained vague, why Meghan's name was not included on internal royal birth ledgers, an entry required by all royal spouses for over 150 years. But Charles had silenced the grumbling. Let them be, he allegedly said. They want to modernize. It's good for optics. William disagreed. Quietly, resolutely, because he had seen the signs. Years before Meghan ever entered the picture, William had already come across the Echo Prime file. It was in 2012, during a private briefing with MI5 regarding threats to the royal line of succession. As part of his preparation as future monarch, William had been given access to the Royal Contingency Archives, a confidential subset of the RMA files we explored earlier. Inside, he found references to genetic continuity protocols, alternative bloodline preservation strategies, and the term Sample 2203C. It meant nothing to him at the time, just dusty documents, technical jargon, until he saw the initials, EDC, and beneath them, a name partially redacted, but still legible. Elena de la Cruz, a name he vaguely remembered, a woman Harry had once visited during a diplomatic training trip. Someone William had assumed was just a friend. Now here she was, in a file about genetic preservation, tied to Harry, tied to the monarchy, and that's when he understood. Harry wasn't just a spare. He was a contingency, a plan, an engineered fallback, a brother born into a web of silent expectations and scientific manipulation. From that moment, William began watching more carefully, not because he doubted Harry, but because he knew that if the plan ever went off course, if the children created from that plan ever became public, the fallout would be catastrophic. And then came Meghan. Suddenly, Harry wasn't just the contingency, he was unpredictable, married to an outsider, breaking norms, declining royal support, challenging palace structure, and worse, he wanted children, but not with the crown's oversight. He wanted control, and William knew, if Harry didn't follow the plan, or worse, unwittingly followed a version of it without knowing all the details, the entire structure would begin to collapse. So William watched. He didn't confront. He didn't accuse. He didn't even warn Harry, because by then, it was already too late. The Geneva clinic had already been reactivated. Sample 2203C had already been requested. The process was already in motion. And William? He just stayed silent. But it wasn't apathy. It was strategy. As the heir, William couldn't be seen interfering. He couldn't risk being accused of jealousy or sabotage. Not with the press already painting Meghan as the victim and Harry as the rebel prince. So instead, William went to work behind the scenes. He commissioned a quiet reevaluation of the Succession Integrity Clause, a rarely discussed constitutional provision designed to verify the legitimacy of heirs in extreme cases. He requested updated medical reports from the Royal Medical Archives. He initiated a new line of communication with MI5's Biological Security Unit. And he waited. He waited for something to break. That moment came in 2021, after Harry's solo trip to Geneva. When Harry failed to appear for the scheduled Red Echo debrief, the confidential virtual meeting we mentioned earlier, William made a decision. He activated the Legacy Contingency Review Protocol. What is that? It's the royal family's nuclear option, a top-secret process triggered when an heir or their children are suspected of violating, bypassing, or falsifying core lineage requirements. The process is designed not to punish, but to protect, to ensure that the public, the parliament, and the monarchy itself are never blindsided by illegitimate heirs or compromised bloodlines. William had initiated it, and once triggered, it couldn't be undone. That's why, in late 2022, William made a discreet trip to Balmoral with a black briefcase, handcuffed to his wrist. Inside, a printed summary of genetic matches from the RMA. Archie, Lilibet, Harry, Charles, and the non-match. Meghan Markle. When he presented the findings to Charles, there was no shouting, no rage, just silence. A long pause, followed by the words, "We'll have to tell him." But not yet. Because even Charles understood, the public wasn't ready. Harry wasn't ready. And William? He was still calculating the cost. But things got worse. By early 2023, Parliament had caught wind of a birth legitimacy anomaly involving a royal descendant born outside sovereign territory. It was a leak. Deliberate? Maybe. A warning? Definitely. Now William was no longer watching. He was cornered. He had to act. Not as a brother, not even as a son, but as a future king. He summoned the family's legal advisors. He restructured the line of succession documentation. He ordered a full internal audit of royal lineage claims dating back to 2018. And then, he prepared for war. Because Meghan wasn't going quietly. Her team had caught on. She filed for enhanced legal protections over her children. She attempted to block certain documents from being submitted to the Crown's archives. And most shockingly, she threatened to expose her own version of the truth unless the monarchy issued a formal public acknowledgement of Archie and Lilibet's titles. The pressure was mounting. The press didn't know the details, but they knew something was brewing. A quiet crisis, they called it. A succession storm, hinted one headline. But only William knew the full scale. Because only William had seen the third file. That's right. There wasn't just the Elena file. There wasn't just the DNA report. There was a third. A sealed envelope, addressed not to Charles, but to William. It arrived in August 2023 via a diplomatic pouch from Geneva. Inside was a letter, handwritten and signed, HRH Princess Diana. It was a copy of a letter she had left in the custody of her personal solicitor in 1996, never meant to be opened unless specific conditions were met. One of those conditions? A child born to Harry without my knowledge, but by my blood. She knew. Somehow she knew. The letter didn't name names. It didn't mention surrogacy, but it did reference the word preparedness. And the final line? He will not know at first, but he must not be punished for a legacy that was chosen for him. That's what broke William. Because he realized then, this wasn't just about Harry's children. This was about Harry himself. He was part of the contingency plan from the beginning, born into it, trained for it, lied to about it. And now, his own children had become pawns in the same system. That's when William made his final decision. He wouldn't let history repeat itself. He would confirm the truth. He would acknowledge the DNA. He would break the silence. But only with Harry. Only in person. And so, on November 8, 2025, he boarded a flight. Destination, Montecito. The press believed it was for diplomacy, for peace. But what really happened in that conversation, behind the gates, away from the cameras, changed the course of royal history. Because what William told Harry, and what Harry whispered back, left them both shaken. Because it wasn't just about Archie and Lilibet anymore. It was about someone else. A secret neither man expected, and a name that hadn't surfaced in over 30 years. But what came next made even William question everything he thought he knew about his family.